So now we have a way to store and manage barbers and services and show them for clients. I guess it's time to finally do appointments. In the server project, let's create a new model called appointment. An appointment is basically a barber, a service, and a date time. Date times are universally hated in programming, so we should be careful here. For now, we just need to know that by default, Prisma stores date times in UTC without time zone info. We'll do the conversions when we get to our other projects. Create a new migration and run it. The next thing, as usual, is to create a new controller. And the first thing in the new controller is the DTO interface. I want to send the full info about the barber and the service, not just their IDs. So we'll put their DTOs as fields here. Same as with the decimal, there is no datetime type in JSON, so we'll send it as a string. Then let's do the conversion function. And here is the problem. Our appointment type that Prisma provides only has barber ID and no actual barber object. And that makes sense, right? I mean, in the database, the appointments table only has the barber ID column. But what happens if I do a join and want to get all the data with a single request? Let's see. I'll write a new function in the controller and fetch the appointments including barbers. Let's see what we got. What? Suddenly we have a barber field here. And that is the magic of Prisma and TypeScript. Prisma is so smart that it figures out what the actual return type is gonna be based on the request parameters. If we look at the return type, it's actually an extension of an appointment type. And that is exactly what we need in our appointment to DTO method. I'll define a new type so it looks cleaner. And with that, we can finish the appointment to DTO method and the findAll method. By the way, some people like to extract DTOs in a separate folder or a file, and that would make sense here since our DTOs start to depend on each other, but I don't think that should be a problem, and I kinda like that my DTOs are near the controllers that use them, so let's keep it as it is for now. Now let's do the appointments creation. In this DTO it's actually the other way around. We actually want IDs here. The idea is that there is no reason for a client to send us the full barber data if just ID is more than enough. In the create endpoint, we'll use Prisma create method as usual. Wait, something is wrong. And that again is why I like TypeScript. It tells us here that we don't have a barber and the barber service fields. And that's because we forgot to include them. Fortunately, it's easy to fix. Let's test. Why do we have ID here? We don't need that. Remember that the datetime needs to be in ISO format. Perfect. Now let's finish the controller by adding find1 and update methods. And with that done, we can switch to the admin project. Before we do anything here, let's organize our components a little bit. I'm gonna separate components that relate to barbers and barber services. I'll also make a folder called common, where we'll put everything else for now. Now let's create a new page for appointments. As always, we'll fetch appointments from the API and show them in the table. And then create a new appointment form. For this form, we'll need the barbers and the services so that the user can select one of each. Fetch them using the queries. Keep in mind that the values that are returned from the form are strings, not numbers, even for select inputs. Default dropdowns are not that pretty, so let's make a custom one with styles. I'll use the useField hook again to make this component usable inside the Formik form. I'll also make our input width 100% and limit the content width on the form page. I think it looks better now. And finally, we can implement actual appointment creation by adding a new API method and a mutation. Let's try it now. Looks good, but I don't like how datetime is displayed. I want it to be pretty and in the current time zone for the browser. Actually, it's not that easy if you think about it. That's why I said datetimes are tricky. Like for example, what if you are making a reservation, but you are in a different time zone? I guess you want to set the time in the barbershop's time zone, so when you arrive, the time on the clock is the same as you specified. On the other hand, if you're a manager and you're on a work trip, you check the schedule and see that some appointment is in an hour. But is it really? I guess it makes more sense to always use local time. But then what happens if your business moves to another country to avoid debts to mafia? Probably the only true thing is that we want to store our dates in UTC and consider them time zone independent, and the rest is optional. For now, let's just convert them to the browser's time zone. We can fix other issues if and when they actually happen. But remember that in our DTO, the datetime is actually a string, so we need to convert it into a date object and back. And there is also a barber service DTO, where the price field is in kinda similar situation. I think a good way to approach it is to separate our models from the DTOs. Let's say that a DTO is something that came from the API with no post-processing. And when we receive them, we convert them into model objects, which are a bit more complex. I'll make a new folder called domain and create 3 new interfaces for our models with functions to convert DTOs to them. It's a bit of typing, and the models are almost identical to the DTOs, but I think it should be worth it. We also need to install a library called decimal.js to work with decimals. Now we can use these new interfaces. The only thing I don't like is how much code repetition we have now, but it's okay as long as it's easy to understand. If someday it gets out of hand, we'll think about another solution. I guess our datetimes look better than before. We can update the format later. The most important part is that the time zone is correct now. As for the create appointment form, having a text input with no assist for the datetime is horrible. In the future we could think about making our custom date selector, but for now let's use a library called React Date Picker. I want to use it inside Formik form, so I'll create a new component as a wrapper for React Date Picker and use the useField hook to get the current value and the set value callback. The library also provides a CSS file that will import so we don't have to style it from scratch. Now let's make the input a bit prettier. We'll just copy the styles from the text input component. I guess at some point future me will have to think about a way to make it cleaner. To change the input for React Date Picker, we need to create a new component and pass it as a prop. Looks kinda nice. The next step would be to create a form on the client's website, but we'll do it in the next video. Thanks for watching.